Hello and welcome to the Two Gals and a Mic podcast. I'm your host, Sue Curver, and on today's episode, I'm sitting down with Karla Gomez, the Chief Clinical Officer at Aspen Growth Coaching, who is on a mission to hold safe space for others to grow and heal through trauma. With a focus on preventing burnout and helping people build systems which support longevity, Karla believes that we can often find more by actually doing less. Karla, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I'd love to kick things off this afternoon with your origin story and how you entered the mental health field, because your path has not been a straight one. In fact, you have training in a completely different vocation, which had you at one time working at the Versace Mansion in South Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
Walk us through how you transitioned from Florida to what you do now and why you chose to enter the mental health space.
Just even hearing you say that I do less now is almost unreal for me because I've always been the type of person to always do more. And once I reach that goal, it only means that now I have to find something else to do. So, to give you a little bit about my background, yes, I'm a classically trained chef, somebody that pursued the environment, the hustle and bustle of a kitchen, the heat, and definitely that external validation of ooh, you're a chef where? I never once considered how my body would respond to that environment, how my mental health would respond, how my family would respond to it as well, and just my overall presence in my environment and in my system. I mean, the burnout in and of itself made me reconsider the fact that I'm a mom now, the fact that I am needed in a different setting and I'm needed in a different perception, I think really allowed for me to reconsider once I went through my timing in the kitchen and I found myself that I was just exhausted, having to constantly fight for my position there, having to constantly show people my skills and my competency, I realized that I wanted to support people in a different way. Food didn't talk back to me. I wanted people to talk to. I wanted to help people find their way, not only find their way through their own family system, but find themselves back to a place where they were in control.
What got you interested in the culinary arts to begin with? Did you grow up in a family that was very food motivated?
Yes, both my family and culturally speaking, yeah, everything is food. I mean, food is life. Food is everything. My grandfather is actually Cuban, well, was Cuban, and he had a pastry shop back in Cuba. And then when they migrated over to Puerto Rico, it was just something that they couldn't necessarily uphold in the business field, but they definitely carried that over into our traditions and just our overall quality time. And I remember being as little as 7, 8 years old and just cooking together. That was just our way of not only catching up with one another, but showing each other love. You know, he had veggies and things in his patio that he would show my sister and I what new harvest they had that day or what new recipe they had that day. So it was definitely a means of showing love to people. And now as an adult, I know that was only part of our love language. And it was a point of quality for us for sure.
Did you have a specialty or a certain area that you like to focus on?
When I first started, I really enjoyed pastries. Pastries and anything baking related is very much about measurement and intentionality and instruction and following order. Whereas anything savory is about cooking with your nose and cooking with what you know. Once I started developing my flavor profile and getting to a point where I felt comfortable with what I preferred and knowing how to follow my nose, I definitely got a little bit more comfortable with cooking savory dishes. I would say when I first started, it was pastries, breads and anything with phyllo dough. Anything that smells like butter and fat is just the key to my heart. As I've gotten older, steak and pork butt and anything with umami is right up my alley.
How did you find yourself cooking in the Versace mansion? There has to be a story in there somewhere.
When I went to culinary school, I was up in North Miami, and naturally, the people that I was going to school with were already working in an area that was very close to the Versace Mansion. I didn't start there. I started at a restaurant The connections that you make in restaurants are exactly that. They're connections to your next step and to your next position. I would say I'm the type of person that I can talk to a wall. I would talk to and get to know everybody, whether it was cleaning with the dishwashers or helping the busboys or just helping people out. Just the mere fact of me starting a conversation as I was helping people was just very natural for me. It was very organic. From one restaurant to one position to another restaurant or another hotel and another position, I got the opportunity.
And what was that turning point? You had mentioned that food doesn't talk back, and you really wanted to be in a position where you could converse in a way that you just cannot converse with phyllo dough. Where was that transition for you? Was there a pivotal moment or something that happened that created that change?
I would argue I do still talk to phyllo dough and butter, but that's a conversation for another day. Yeah, I mean, in the kitchen it's brutal. It's brutal back there. I became a mom, like I said. I was a young mom. I turned 21 2 months into being a brand new mom. So reality hit me hard. Reality was needing a completely different type of energy from me, was needing involvement and determination and discipline in other parts of my life that the kitchen wasn't really allowing me to be in. That environment, the requirements that that position had for me, really put me in a position of giving leftovers to the people that I loved the most. I wasn't able to prioritize the people that I really wanted to prioritize. And I definitely was not prioritizing myself. I would work anywhere between 12 and 16 hours was a regular shift, yelling at the top of my lungs pretty much all day, every day. And if it wasn't that, it was fighting the fact that I was competent and fighting the fact that I got to that position through skill and knowledge and not because of X, Y, and Z. It was just always a battle. I started taking self inventory and realizing, oh, I'm supposed to be doing something else. Like, I'm good at this, but I think I could be great at something else. There were things in my family system that required for me to look at things from a different perception. It only became the responsible thing for me to do to shift my knowledge and shift my experience into something that was more impactful, not just for my direct family and my family of origin, my daughter, my own nervous system, but something that was implementing the knowledge that I had and could impact the masses as much as possible.
So you chose mental health. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you're now the chief clinical officer at Aspen Growth Coaching. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about this practice and your role within the group.
Aspen Growth Coaching, or AGC for short, is an organization or a mental health firm that supports people from their communities with their loved ones. Typically, whenever you hear about somebody being placed in residential care or needing a higher level of care, you have the one person that is the identified patient is now removed from the family system, is now removed from their normality, from their schedules and their environment, and asked to go on this protocol that supports them in recovering. What we do is we bring that over to the family system with their loved ones, with the environment that is more than likely going to activate and trigger them without them having to take pause in life. And there is certainly necessity, and there is certainly type of events that do require for a person to be placed in residential care, but that's not always the case. If people are already in a position of even considering residential care, then they're probably in a position of considering alternative methods and ensuring that they're also doing the best that they can as support system, as loved ones, to ensure that there's a parallel process. So that's where we come in. Our mission is really to give people access to alternative methods and a curated experience that considers the entire family system, not just this bracket of time that you get sent away and you're not sure what your family system is doing back home, if they're learning what you're learning, etc. With my position, it's all about ensuring that there is continuous access to any trends that are happening within the scientific world and any evidence based models that are being updated or new information that comes up that would be beneficial to the populations that we serve. We're in a constant transition, which means that we have to be out there with the population, with the people that we support to ensure that we're also operating with ethics and morality at the forefront of everything that we do.
You've used this term family system quite a
Yeah.
bit. How would you define a family system? What does that look like?
Support. It's all about support. It doesn't necessarily have to be biological family, right? But it's definitely the people that you've identified as the people that you're vulnerable with, the people that have seen you through the spectrum of your human experience, whether it's your sister, your brother, your mom, dad, or the neighbor that has been there in your really dark days. Anybody that you feel that you can continue being in that vulnerable space, but can also feel comfortable understanding feedback and somebody that helps you maintain accountability. So, not just somebody that you're willing to kind of dish it out with, but somebody that you're willing to also lend an ear when they're trying to keep you accountable.
Your group, Aspen Growth Coaching, is coaching those people that are within the family system, or is it focused on the person who's seeking the mental health help?
There's multiple starting lines to the work that we do. And because of the age group that we work with, there can be so many points of entry that we really have to consider from the beginning. For the most part, Sue, we have people that have already gone through treatment and are trying to avoid treatment altogether. They understand what milieu exposure is. They understand that they can't necessarily avoid regressing periods or periods of regression if they go into residential care. And so they try to work it out from their current situation, whether it's work, whether it's school, with whomever the partner is. We also have people that are more educated as to what the exposure could potentially do and how it can become even more detrimental to where they're currently at. A lot of the times, it really is on us to understand what the most efficient and valuable point of entry is so that we can figure out what's the most efficient way that we can support this family? Or is it just an individual for now and eventually we're going to support the family? What is the modality and the type of conversation, the type of support, the type of stimuli that is going to really allow this person to become uncomfortable enough to elicit change? And the most important thing of the work that we do is that we're forecasting behavior. As professionals that have operated in the mental health space for as long as we have access to studying behavior and we determine, okay, this is what's getting in your way. These are your goals, and this is the action plan moving forward. Our work is heavily based on creating actionable steps and objective movement so that we can kind of hold people very closely as we create the discomfort that's going to elicit the change that we're talking about.
You're talking a lot about exposure, which may be linked to triggers. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure.
So you base a lot of your work on resilience-based methods.
Mhm.
What are resilience-based methods, and why is resilience so important to the healing process?
Naturally, as humans, we notice when things are difficult and we tend to shy away from them, right? And there are a lot of opportunities or a lot of modalities that can either enable that shyness and that immediate aversion that could potentially be, a natural response in a defense mechanism. Whereas with us, it's more about utilizing, I call it a pulse, that pulse that's underneath the sense of urgency or that defense mechanism, that discomfort that kind of makes you want to like pull yourself out of your own skin, rather than allowing that to become what you are trying to reject or avoid, allowing that to become the compass to see what are the things that you need to address in your life to allow you to continue moving away from that comfort level. If we allow anxiety, or if we allow any sort of discomfort, whether it's frustration, whether it's fear, whether it's panic, to continue making decisions for us, it's only going to confirm whatever fears you have within you or whatever patterns could be confirming that enabling tendency. If we flip the switch a little bit and we utilize that as a sense of information, as a control tower, as a lens to the areas within ourselves that we have to focus on, that we have to strengthen, that we have to create resilience and tolerance around, odds are you're going to be able to tap into the goals that you already have within yourself.
You also focus on baseline biological markers to support one's overall health. What are baseline biological markers, and why is it important to understand them?
Biofeedback, biomarkers is a short way of saying that. If we come to think about ourselves as we operate through our day to day lives, we're constantly on this response mechanism of external stimuli, whether it's our laptops, our phones, our computers, TVs, whatever. We're always responding to external stimuli, meaning we're constantly pulling our attention to external means of validation. And we've also become incredibly accustomed to identifying our emotions, identifying our opinions, assigning value and assigning meaning to things through this external validating mechanism. A lot of what we do and how we support people is through connecting them to their bodies, to the way that their bodies are responding to stimuli, to responding to the stamina and the stimuli that your body is informing you of what you have. Your body is constantly feeding you information. You're just not connected to it because you're paying attention to everything else. So if you take pause and you start learning what signs and what Dr. Deloney says this all the time, what GPS pins you have in your body, you can learn to kind of have a different response to these stimuli. Let's say, for example, when you get nervous, your chest starts tightening up and maybe your hands get a little clammy and maybe you start feeling a little bit jittery and there's a certain amount of response within your body that is much more apparent than intellectualizing what it is that you're going through. If we divert our energy and we connect what's happening with our bodies with whatever thoughts are corresponding to that response or whatever emotions are assigned to that response, our efforts tend to be much more efficient. I can connect people to a certain response in their body based on an emotion or based on a potential memory and start creating action plans or start creating safety nets that are taking that into consideration moving forward. So I can't tell you that you're never going to feel anxiety again. I feel anxiety all the time. Have you ever driven down Miami, down the expressway over here? If I know what are the responses that my body is going to go through as I go into traffic, I can set myself up for success. I can give myself the 10 extra minutes that I need. I can put on some bossa nova in the background and calm myself down, right? I can give myself regulating tools that are going to be much more supportive rather than me just being thrown into a situation and not know how to respond effectively.
So we've talked about resilience and we've talked about our body's reaction to all of these stimuli and all of these things. Let's talk a little bit about generational trauma. This is a term that we hear quite a bit. What is generational trauma, and does your practice do any work to sever that so that it does not continue from one generation to another?
Generational trauma is any sort of event that has carried through, that has left its mark in every generation. I can use my culture, for example. There are things in my culture. I'm born and raised in Puerto Rico. I grew up Catholic. I grew up with certain social dispositions that still to this day inform the way that I make decisions, inform my values, inform the way that I feel and perceive about the world around me, right? There are things that happened 3 generations ago in my grandparents' life, for example, and the way that they carried and made decisions, for example, moving out of Cuba, moving to Puerto Rico, that informs the way that I do things today. Anything that happened generations ago that is still being carried through the generations, whether it's through emotions, behavior, decision making, perception, that is really what we consider when we're talking about generational trauma. I also believe that it has a way of keeping you in a very granular emotional state. And what I mean by that is it kind of keeps you really tethered almost in this worm's eye view. So, constant hypervigilance and constant awareness of what's around you and constant concern for what people are expecting you to do and how people expect you to behave and all these external outcomes rather than understanding how things are being interpreted and you being able to listen to your own voice. A lot of the work that we do with that is really pulling people out of that worm's eye view into bird's eye view, allowing them to see this is what has happened in your family lineage. And not so long ago, we're talking about 2 generations ago. It still informs the way that you make decisions because your grandparents informed your parents and educated them. And your parents had also a lot to do with the way that you perceive the world. How much of this perception and the way that you're carrying your internal narrative, your identity formation, the way that you relate to others, the way that you control your emotions and your tolerance in terms of frustration. How much of all of that is yours, and how much of it is carried out through the expectations of the people that either raised you or are around you?
But how do you know? How do you know how much of it is yours and how much of it is passed on?
There's usually a big discomfort around what's not yours. The thoughts and the feelings that are not yours usually come equipped with a what if, or with a feeling of untetheredness. I use the tethered or untetheredness distinction a lot because there isn't really another word that can encompass that feeling just as often as it does with untetheredness. I talk about also giving visual to a helium balloon. There are certain thoughts and certain opinions that aren't ours, and we tend to feel very disconnected by them. We feel whether it's a pulse. I talk about that pulse often. I talk about feeling untethered and uncomfortable, and as if you need external validation by confirmation in conversation to other people. If we start listening and if we start kind of going behind the scenes on those thoughts and on those conversations and on those impulses, you can get to a point where you can hear what's truly yours and what has nothing to do with what you expect out of yourself.
So it sounds like you kind of have to get quiet and you have to get a little bit focused on these things that we're talking about, on your own reactions, on your biomarkers, on your understanding of your family systems, past and present.
Absolutely. The discomfort of stillness.
Speaking of discomfort, it seems that COVID really created an onslaught of discomfort and crisis situations for many because of the disconnectedness. Have you seen an increase in people who are seeking mental health help? And do you feel like things are shifting and that mental health conversations are becoming more accepted as a result of this?
Yes and no. I do think if we were to talk about clients as consumers, I would say they're more educated when they get to our caseloads. But that's not necessarily a good thing. They're educated in terms of knowing the terminology, understanding the modalities that exist, having access to, this is the modality that works best with this disorder. And this is the modality that I've Googled that goes well or responds better to this disorder or to this deficit or whatever the case may be. But because they're focused on the external validation, they haven't been able to do the introspection. They haven't gotten to a point where they can observe the full spectrum of that behavior, of that pattern, to identify how it correlates to one another, to identify who within my surroundings can support me. And so it becomes yet another hurdle to kind of pull them out of what they think they know. There's access to information, and there's also the interpretation piece. You can't replace a mental health professional or somebody that can see you from the external sense of yourself to mirror those patterns and to keep you accountable in these circumstances just because you know the language. I definitely do find people that are more comfortable with talking about mental health, people that are willing to just open up about their traumas, open up about the things that have happened. But I also find that with that openness comes a little bit of arrogance, and that arrogance then becomes something that we then have to kind of get away from first and foremost is that first level, and then we get into the real work.
So you mentioned access to info and we can Google all day long and go to WebMD and try to figure out what's wrong
Yeah.
and how to cure it. And then you also mentioned the interpretation part. What about traditional ways of approaching mental health? How is your practice, your group so different from just giving someone some medication and a certain kind of counseling and sending them on their way?
There never really is just one way of supporting a person. We are a body of systems. We have to support the systems. If we get to a person that has a certain level of understanding or perception into where they're struggling, we can understand that that is a system that is in deficit, that is suppressed. Just by addressing this system does not mean that something else is going to resurface or something else is in deficit or is in suppression mode. A lot of the work that we do is that, so to speak, that control tower, being able to look at the behaviors or the symptoms or the reporting that is happening on the outside and reverse engineering it. A lot of what we do is bringing in an entire team to support every single system. So I've worked with neuropsych assessors, I've worked with naturopathic doctors, I've worked with nurse practitioners, I've worked with clinicians from multiple areas, because it's truly about understanding how is this showing up and how can we address it from a way that promotes autonomy, promotes recovery, and promotes you being able to understand the root cause of it. It's not our intention to say, okay, these are the symptoms, these are the tools, off you go. We truly want to educate the person. I have many clients that come to me because they're struggling with ADHD deficits. And what that typically looks like is brain fog, that looks like poor emotional regulation, poor distress tolerance. For the women clients, that looks also like the luteal phase. Those symptoms tend to rise and become incredibly palpable. Sometimes that even includes suicidal ideation. So sure, I could address this from a behavioral side. I could educate the person as to these are the symptoms that you're experiencing and the mechanisms that are enabling you to experience them. And I'm also going to recommend you to an endocrinologist, and I'm also going to bring in a naturopathic doctor so that we can look into the protocols that are biologically going to support the work that we're doing. There are many interventions that are not being considered because you're just looking at things from a superficial aspect. As clinicians, as people, and right now as coaches, as my position as chief clinical officer, I want to give entire control towers to people. I want people to be able to get into our caseload, learn as much as they can about their own internal experience, how their internal experience interacts with the world around them, and be able to get to a point where they say, oh, I get it. I understand why these symptoms are coming up. And guess what? At the point where I'm expecting my luteal phase, now these are the safety nets that I need to apply for myself. You know, for me, again, bossa nova and chocolate, Ben and Jerry's, and I'm a happy girl.
I think you bring up a really good point. And I don't know if this is talked about as much as it should be. As you were talking about the luteal phase and the different things that can happen, I was immediately thinking about perimenopause and about menopause and about all of these changes that women are experiencing that are only now starting to get some airtime,
Yeah.
which could have serious mental health ramifications as well. Do you do
Mhm.
any work in that area?
Absolutely. And I love supporting women and being able to get to a point to understand and predict their symptoms. I don't think we can sell the idea of never feeling anything, right? Or never being in control of your body, because that's not the human experience. But I do think we can get to a point where we can start predicting and we can forecast and we can get to a point where we can understand our bodies and support ourselves with what we need as the weeks go by. We are hormonal creatures dictated by biology. If our biology is not taken care of, is not supported, guess what? Our emotional regulation is not going to be present because all of the energy is now being thrown towards your physiology. You're being presented with these factors because they are external. It's what people can mirror back at you. And again, because we're in a society and we are in a world where there are so many external distractions, it isn't up until you create the stillness and you start really looking inward and start to connect with your body and focus on introspection where you can start creating those patterns and observing them. I can't tell you how many times, Zoo, I get to work with women and I start seeing patterns show up and I start pinpointing when their luteal phase or their follicular phase is coming up and I start seeing the patterns show up again. So a lot of our support is observing patterns, being able to identify when are you feeling bad, when are these thoughts coming up, what are the quality of your thoughts right before you get your period, and how do they change. So really witnessing ourselves and observing ourselves almost like a science case, being able to just take back some time, be intentional, and witness ourselves in the experience of as the next couple of months go by. It's easy to Google and to say, okay, I have brain fog, I have a hard time with executive functioning skills, I am having X, Y, and Z symptoms, and Google says that I may be a candidate for ADHD. But have you also looked into your lifestyle? Have you looked into how you sleep and the quality of your sleep? Have you looked into your blood work? Have you also looked into your nutrition and how you're taking care of yourself, again, in a physiological state? So then we can consider everything else. It's very easy to over pathologize people because it's just so accessible and it's easy to identify a certain deficit with this is the name, this is what I've got, versus these are the systems that are on deficit right now. How about we work towards getting you back to baseline and then we assess?
Well, Karla, we've been talking a lot about your work, but in addition to the important work that you do, you mentioned that you're also a mom.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you find the energy and the capacity to do both momming and the work that you do well?
Oh man, I think I'm also very lucky because my kid is incredible. Maybe I'm just biased there, but she's just one of these kids that she'll wake up and do her breakfast and, do her own laundry. I also have an incredible support system. I have my parents that live close by. I have family and friends that are all incredibly supportive of my career. And my need in this moment is to be incredibly present in both my career and being a mom. I also will say that block scheduling has changed my life, and I can't recommend that more to working professionals that are also parents. I block out periods of time throughout the day to focus on certain things, including my child, including quality time. If it's not on my calendar, Sue, it's not happening. A couple of years ago, she was doing scouting on top of everything that we had going on. And the only way that I could add something to my already hectic schedule was blocking out Tuesdays. That was what was necessary in that moment. But honestly, block scheduling has changed my life. I can't recommend it enough.
I would say block scheduling, but also courage to be present. So, what do daily steps of courage look like for you? And do you have a wellness routine that allows you to be courageous?
It does take a lot of courage and a lot of determination and discipline to be present. It's hard to be present. I too am human. I catch myself either working too late or being plugged into my phone too long or focusing on keeping my house too clean because I'm also a bit neurotic. I've learned to not expect perfection from myself. I think that's also the wiggle room and the grace that has allowed for me to reshift my focus and give myself a little bit of flexibility. In terms of self care, that's a good question because not every day looks the same and not every day requires the same need for myself. Sometimes that self care looks like me leaving the laundry on my bed for 3 days so that I can focus on going outside and going on a long walk rather than spending an hour folding and putting stuff away. Sometimes that looks like if I have a heavy clinical day, you better believe I'm going to be out rolling in the dirt with my dogs. Other times that means that I need to be in my garden. I do a lot of disconnection through kinetic tasks. So things that just bring me to being really present and kind of pull me out of my brain, which is nonstop. My kid is somebody that keeps me accountable. Talk about keeping people that keep you accountable. She'll be the first one to tell me, "Mommy, you've been on your computer for 5 hours straight and you haven't even had lunch. Go get lunch." So again, I'm very lucky and fortunate.
Well, food is love, right?
It is. She learned.
So, Karla, as you consider your journey, what's been the most challenging aspect and what strategies do you employ to navigate adversity?
Stillness has been and still is the most challenging thing for me to pursue. And it is a constant pursuit. Stillness is how I show up for myself. It's how I honor my needs. It's how I honor all the things that I've been through in order to get myself here, and is actively one of the most difficult things that I do for myself. I grew up in an environment in a household that promoted that sense of urgency, that assigned a lot of value and worth to sense of urgency and outcomes. Everything that I did to get me to this point is not sustainable. It got me to this point because I was in survival mode. Now that I've arrived, how do I shift that focus and get to a position where I can actually observe it and I can actually enjoy of my time here? And that requires a lot of stillness. So it requires for me to be very present and very aware of when that discomfort shows up for me. When cheap dopamine hits, when that urge hits, that you want to grab your phone, that you want to pull your computer, that you want to check onto the next thing, anytime that I feel that need for external validation, that is a sure sign of me needing to connect with myself. I'm not connecting with myself. I'm focused externally and I need to bring myself back to center. And the quickest way for me to do that is in those tasks that I was mentioning earlier. That pulse that I was telling you about earlier, that discomfort is so important. It's not something I suppress, it's not something I avoid. It's a marker. It's an alarm for me. It's telling me, like, oh, you've been paying too much attention to external means of validation and you're not checking in with yourself. So it's a very good alarm system and one that works very well for me.
When you look back on all of this, what are you the most proud of?
I'm a mom, and the first thing that comes up to me is the quality of human that my daughter is. I see her and I see her making strides in her academic career, how she is with other people, how caring and emotionally aware she is. I think that's what I'm most proud of. My daughter's emotional intelligence and awareness, more so in a world that is so constantly distracted. In myself, I mean, I think my profession has so much to do with my personal mission. I think the fact that I've been able to remain congruent in my efforts, both as a professional and as a person, is what I'm most proud of.
So that was looking back. Now, as we look forward, what legacy do you want to leave, not only with your professional work, but on a larger or more holistic scale?
On a professional realm, I'd love to be the person that has allowed people to get to know themselves. That in a world of fast, I've taught people how to be slow, how to remain in that slowness and that stillness and get to know themselves. I love for people to get to that point of no return. That's one of the first things I say when I bring on a new client into my caseload. It's like, we're going to get to a point where you're going to have so much information about yourself that it's going to require for you to take inventory on everything that you're doing, relationships, jobs, the way that you're dressing, the way that you're eating, everything. And that point of no return is both so painful and so beautiful because it's almost like the person molted into the person that they were supposed to be anyway. So if I'm known for that, I think I'll be really happy for the rest of my life.
So, speaking of legacy, Karla, what's next for you? Do you have any big, audacious goals?
Yes, we launched a new program. It's called Integrative Partnerships. And it's where we use medically assisted treatments and therapies to be able to support openness, almost like an expressway into people's understanding of their own consciousness and their own life story. We are partnering with people all over this country and all over the world, whether it's retreats or ketamine clinics. We have a retreat in Sayulita, Mexico that utilizes assisted psychotherapy through psychedelics to be able to facilitate this openness that we're talking about. So it's a lot of preparation. It's a 6 week model that allows you to identify, understand the intentions of this retreat and the integration of such, right? So our partnerships and most importantly, the integration in these partnerships is giving people access to more options to taking care of themselves. It's a very efficient and expedited way of getting to a place of getting answers. There is a place for therapy, there is a place for residential care, but we're more in the business of keeping people within their homes with their loved ones and their communities and getting to a place of getting answers, actually getting to a place where they feel like they're in control. So this is merely another way for people to be able to do that. So I'm incredibly proud of that and we just launched it.
That's so interesting. I'm hearing so much about these
Yeah.
psychedelic assisted retreats and opportunities, especially, I work a lot and participate a lot in the veteran
Hmm.
world. So it's something that even the VA has been exploring.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are clinical trials for the FDA right now for MDMA. I think it's
Hmm.
on phase 3, if I'm not mistaken. They are going through what I'll very politely call a kerfuffle. There's over 50 years worth of supporting data that showcases veterans, war veterans, people that have seen real things and people that have met criteria for PTSD for years on end no longer meet criteria for PTSD after MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And I'm not talking about the low numbers. We're talking about 83%, 92%, 96% of people that have gone through these trials no longer meet criteria. These are two things that had never been placed together. I too have just a very special place in my heart for the veteran population. My father's a veteran, my brother was a veteran, I have another brother that's a veteran. And throwing medications at them and hoping that talk therapy is going to do wonders for them in a population that has been taught to shut down, to suppress, that has essentially gotten confirmation for all of these defense mechanisms for years on end. And then on top of that, you throw quite literal suppression of systems to be able to process this. Talk therapy isn't the answer. EMDR is beautiful, and I myself am taught in trauma counseling and in that perception, and I very much respect that modality. But we're talking about a population that needs access to more, that needs neuroplasticity, that needs openness, that needs for us to have a different intervention method and a physiological intervention method to then get to a place where they can talk about it. For the veteran and first responder population, the numbers I've seen have just been beautiful. So I'm really excited to be able to start getting into this world. We're finally at a place where we have intentional integrative protocols that are going to support people through different types of assisted psychotherapy.
So, for those who are struggling, what advice would you give to overcoming challenges, handling unexpected things, and growing through trauma?
I think vulnerability is a starting line. It's not an answer for everything, but it's a very attainable starting line. Any sort of trauma, any sort of event that happens that is confounding, that suppresses our ability to even understand it in linear thought and get to a place where we can understand how we feel about it, suddenly becomes a little bit more manageable and more understandable, more real, more material if we start talking about it. And sadly, what happens with trauma is isolation, suppression. We tend to get very quiet. We tend to move away from the people that we love the most because we don't want them to see, or we feel like we are in a position of controlling how we're going to externalize the response of that trauma. I can't say this enough. A starting line is vulnerability, is talking to people, even if the other person doesn't know what the solution is, but getting it out of your head, out of the echo chamber of your head, and really allowing another person to witness you going through that, witness what you're going through, and witness your expression of it. And then getting to a point where you can say, I either need help with this, I need help finding a solution, or I just need you to lend me your ear. Vulnerability will always, for me, be the A1A of getting to a point where you feel that you're a little bit more in control of what's happening to you.
One last question for you, Karla. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you wanted to share?
I'll go back to the population that we were talking about, women, and the correlation between hormonal fluctuations and their mental health. And it's important to start observing the quality of your mind, the quality of your thoughts, the fluctuations and emotion, whether you're having certain thoughts in the morning, whether you're having certain thoughts in the evening, how those thoughts and those patterns correlate to what week of the month you're in and how they get closer to your period. Or if you have a certain response in thought in correlation with your hormonal weeks in response to your shifts. Even for myself, even as somebody that's constantly educating other women on going through this, I don't see it within myself. I have somebody that I speak to about this so that they can keep me accountable, because as much as I know the signs, it's really hard for me to see myself in that way. So not only observe the patterns and maybe have an app that can keep you accountable, share that with somebody. Start picking up and start having a conversation around, like, when I'm in my luteal phase or when I'm about to get my period, that I'm not only just experiencing the cramps, that I'm not just experiencing the tenderness, I'm also having a really hard time with the quality of my thoughts. I'm also noticing I'm a bit negative, that my thoughts are a little bit darker than the usual. I'm also noticing that I have an increased cravings for carbs in the evening. Things that we don't think are correlated to one another are deeply correlated to one another. And as much as we have an identified pattern, now we can do something about it. Now we can forecast, we can strategize, we can supplement if that's needed. But we're taught to just suffer. We're taught to just deal. And we don't have to. We don't have to deal with the symptoms. We don't have to deal with just suffering in silence. I cannot speak to that enough. I cannot tell you, Sue, how many times I have women that have struggled for decades on end. Nobody has asked them about the correlation between their mental health and their physiological hormonal changes. And lo and behold, they belong to one another. They're correlated to one another. You address the hormonal fluctuations if they need any sort of therapy, if they need any sort of protocol with the naturopathic doctor that I was telling you about. And all of a sudden, these fluctuations are not as traumatic. They're not as marked. So we're just taught to deal. We're taught to suppress. We're taught to just suffer. We don't have to. We don't have to do any of that.
Well, thank you, Karla, for sharing your insights and your input about the importance of advocating for our mental health. With so much happening in a constantly evolving world, normalizing these conversations is critical. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. To learn more about Karla and Aspen Growth Coaching, you can find a link to the website in the show notes. So be sure to share this episode and then tune in again for another edition of the Two Gals and a Mic podcast. I'll see you then.